Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session Why Risk Management Techniques Are Important in Ethical Hacking. I'm Richa, and I'll be your host for the day. Our speaker for the session today is Irene Corpuz, co founder of Women in Cybersecurity. Please note the session will be in listen only mode and will last for 50 minutes, out of which 10 last 10 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. Requesting all the participants to post your questions in the Q&A window. Should you need any assistance during the session, please let us know in the chat box. Also, we do have two criteria for certification. Participant needs to attend the complete webinar. Second, fill in the survey and write the answer to the 3 MCQ question based on the webinar, which will be sent to you one day post the webinar. A quick update to all the women attendees. As we celebrate Women's History Month, EC Council is happy to announce that our women attendee can gain access to an exclusive Code Red Box bundle designed by global women leaders, Dr. Anuradha Rao, founder of Cyber Cognizant, and Lisa, CISSP certified instructor for the United States Air Force, which will be releasing soon. To do so, please make sure that you attend the full webinar and fill in the survey. About our speaker, Irene has more than 30 years of combined experience in IT operation, information security, and government risk and compliance, project management, quality and excellence models, and ISO audit. She worked at a Swiss-based multinational company for 17 years and is currently based in Abu Dhabi for most of her work in the UAE-related information security strategy, development, managing the Security Operations Center, vendor management, and implementing and auditing according to security standards. Irene is also a co-founder of the Women in Cybersecurity Middle East and is heavily engaged in its activities supporting women and girls in their professional growth. She has received several accolades, including the Middle East Top 30 CISOs, Middle East Security Awards Women Executive, the 100 Most Influential Filipinas in the World, Most Innovative Security Project London, the Filipino Times IT Professional of the Year, and the Stevie Award Women in Cyber Security Award, New York. So without any further delay, I would now hand over the session to you, Reem.
Thank you, Richa, for the very warm introduction. I also want to thank EC Council for giving me this opportunity to speak at the Cyber Talks, to share what I have learned in my years of experience in one of the fields of information security, and that is information security risk management. Likewise, I also would like to thank everyone for your interest in this webinar. And thank you for all of you who have participated in the online quizzes, and that of our colleagues as well in the EC Council who posted those quizzes via LinkedIn. I will do my best to deliver and share as much knowledge as within the allocated period. It's 40 minutes, I believe. Our webinar is entitled Why Risk Management Techniques Are Essential in Ethical Hacking. In this webinar, I also hope to give as a takeaway, like a career path or advice on how ethical hackers, those who are doing the VAPT, can look at the information security risk manager or information security risk auditor as a possible management or career direction. Of course, if you are, let's say, a hardcore ethical hacker, you can also go into the direction of becoming a SOC manager or SOC director. But this is not the context of this webinar today. In this webinar, we will discuss first about the enterprise risk management, how it comes as a vital part of the organization, understanding how the cascaded corporate strategy would require a risk department, what are the department's goals, and how they support the strategy as a whole. Next, the cyber risk assessment, cybersecurity risk assessment. What is the difference between cybersecurity risk assessment and the risk assessment that other departments would normally do? Third, why risk management techniques are essential in ethical hacking. We may say they are essential to know, or they are essential to map and work in parallel or side by side. Here, we will also understand and try to bridge the gap between the ethical hackers or the VAPT team, their objectives, and the IS risk management objective. Sometimes if they don't meet in the same language, there is like a difference between what the pen testers would understand of their task and the risk managers would not understand or meet what the VAPT, the pen testers are doing. Lastly, I will briefly show a risk register. I'll show you how it works as a tool for the risk managers in monitoring and reviewing the risk. So we will proceed now. First is the enterprise risk management. Let us define what is a risk. A risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. And we say objectives, we mean strategic objectives. Second, risk can be a deviation of what against what is expected. They could be positive or negative deviations. And yes, not all risks are negative. There are also positive risks. For example, with the fourth industrial revolution and the fact that we are now actually moving to the fifth industrial revolution, embracing the challenge to meet the demands in the industry, the businesses are increasingly searching for new ways to incorporate technology for greater efficiency. Let's say digital transformation. The example of this are enabling chatbots in the phone banking, for example. However, more organizations also realize that with such investment in innovation, there may be a need to eliminate some jobs within the company. Redundancy, for the employees, this is a risk of losing jobs, which is a negative development. But for the enterprise, the significant savings in the wages plus the improvement in efficiency and consistency, this is a positive result. So this is why we say a deviation can be a positive or negative. Of course, greater efficiency means higher customer satisfaction. Higher customer satisfaction means attracting more customers, and so on. It's a spiraling effect. Third, a risk is expressed in terms of a combination of the consequences of an event or vulnerability and the associated likelihood or occurrence. Therefore, risk equals impact or the consequences times the likelihood or the probability. Again, risk equals impact times probability. ERM or enterprise risk management is an ongoing process. It is designed to manage all risk. It is not a one-time exercise. It involves cooperation and participation of the key stakeholders in the organization, as well as some individuals who can represent their specific departments as a risk management team. It is important to establish an ERM framework because it enables the firm to gain a clearer view of the overall risk level. An effective ERM framework will establish common language around the risk. It means we talk in the same language. Next, it provides a clear definition of the roles and responsibilities. It establishes a clear ERM methodology. It means you don't do your risk assessment according to how you want it. And then the other person would also do their risk assessment according to how they believe it should be done. It is understanding and establishing a clear ERM methodology. Risk appetite, agree on the risk appetite. This basically is agreed with the management or the board. A risk appetite is an articulation of the tolerance level for risk that an organization is prepared to accept as they execute their strategic and business objectives. There are other benefits of establishing an ERM. Some of them are to improve the deployment of a capital, break down the silos between various departments, improve transparency, promote a culture of risk awareness, and there are other more. The ISO 31000 is the ISO standard for risk management. It has guidelines, it provides principles, has a framework and a process for managing the risk. It can be used by any organization regardless of its size, activity, or sector. Specifically, the clause number 5 of ISO 31000 talks about the framework. It is the leadership and commitment. You see that there are the integration, the design, implementation, evaluation, and improvement. Like any ISO standards, it applies the PDCA, the plan, do, check, and act, the Deming, the very famous Deming cycle. So it's the same as the ISO 31000. You also do a plan of your risk assessment or risk management. You check it, plan, you do it, implement it. You check after you do a risk assessment. It doesn't stop there. You continuously check it. And then there's a continuous cycle of evaluation. Now, what is a cyber risk assessment? It's just one of the activities that you do when you are involved in risk management. A risk assessment, a cyber risk assessment, is the process of identifying, analyzing, and evaluating risks. It helps to ensure that the cybersecurity controls you chose are appropriate to the risk your organization faces. Here it means you have controls in place, already in place. You have a cybersecurity control that you'd like to assess whether they are still effective. Where there is an enterprise risk division responsible for managing the enterprise's risk, the IT division who manages the IT-related risk would have to be integrated. Do you remember the last slide or the last part discussion in the previous slide? I mentioned about the ERM framework, and one of the areas there is about integration. So the setup varies actually from organization to organization. But where there is no enterprise risk division, some mature IT divisions establish their own GRC, or governance, risk, and compliance. This is where they would hire a GRC manager or GRC director. There are several reasons why you need to also to do a risk assessment. It's you have to it contributes to reduction of long-term costs. VAPT, vulnerability assessment and pen testing. Of course, if you can identify the potential threats and vulnerabilities, then working on mitigating them can prevent or reduce the security incident. The cyber risk assessment also provides a better organizational knowledge, understanding where your organizational stands and how to improve your security posture. It can avoid data breaches. It can avoid regulatory issues. Customer data that is stolen because you failed to comply with HIPAA, PCI DSS, or GDPR. Can cause some regulatory issues to you. So that is some of the importance of cybersecurity risk assessment. Cyber risks pose a threat to your organization's data assets, CIA, or confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I would assume that most of us here already are familiar with the CIA. The confidentiality means you need to protect the data residing in your system. It means at rest. In transit, these are the ones, for example, bank remittances or payments on e-commerce websites such as eBay or Amazon, or data which is in process, filing of online forms, the students' application in the universities. Processing of data here, it means they are live, they are in process. So you need to protect the data from unauthorized use, unauthorized access, or unauthorized interception. The second part of the triad is the integrity. You should detect any alteration in the data, whether, again, it is at rest, in transit, or in process. The last part that you need to secure or be careful of the threats is the availability. High availability, redundancy, reliability, acceptable response time, of course, availability only to authorized user. This is where the access management come in. And based on your risk appetite, we mentioned about the risk appetite earlier, how much reputational damage are you willing to accept? I don't know if you noticed a few days back, the social media, Facebook, Twitter, IG, including Instagram, I think, experienced an outage. The posting of the messages are delayed, but they were able to resume normal operations within 24 hours. Did this heavily impact or give them a reputational damage? Maybe not, but if you think that that particular outage is being caused by a breach or attack by the hackers, then this is a bigger reputational damage or a concern to the users. Ethical hackers are aware that their role is vital in proactively addressing the risks brought by the vulnerabilities in the organization. And therefore, it is much better to understand how ethical hackers could be merged with the level of managing according to ERM, or your enterprise risk management, or your enterprise risk framework or guidelines. Enterprise risk management, let's look at the top down and bottom up of it. Corporate strategy. This is the organization's strategy. It defines its aspirations, its goals, business objectives. Within those objectives are projects or initiatives that will be executed to achieve the goals. The corporate strategies typically range in 5 years. Corporate strategy is cascaded to every department. Each of the departments would own one or more of the objectives within the corporate strategy. The Enterprise Risk Division's primary function is the ERM, which is designed to identify potential events that may affect the entity, and they manage the risk to be within the risk appetite to provide a reasonable assurance regarding the achievement of entity objectives. The ER division would develop the risk policy, the procedures, the framework, the guidelines, and they also cascade this as well, of course, to the department to have a unified approach in the risk management. Note here as well that I don't mean that the corporate strategy is only cascaded to the risk division, okay? Just to clarify. Now, once the enterprise risk management or the framework has been established, the risks within for the whole organization have been identified. That is also cascaded to every department. In this, for the purpose of this discussion, I'm only showing the IT department, of course. So cascading the enterprise risk framework, the departments will develop their own risk registers, their own policy, for example, information security policy for the IT department. The IT departments also typically would have various units like application development, network and infrastructure, InfoSec, or this is where you see the SOC team, Security Operations Center. You have threat intelligence team, you have forensic team, etc. Sometimes bigger IT departments would have their own IT project management team. And of course, IT operations or help desk is always present. IT security is where typically the GRC function resides. Again, GRC is governance, risk, and compliance. So in terms of governance, there should be, again, the security policy. I also mentioned here that cybersecurity assessment and VAPT, but there are other related documents that should exist. It's not only limited to this. You would have a better, you should be able to manage the risk better if you understand your organization's strategy, the objectives that you own, and to which goals do they align. The reason why a strategy is cascaded from the corporate down to the department is so that when you do something, you know that you are contributing to the achievement of your organization's strategy. So for example, in the case of the IT department, if the organization is, let's say, an banking or a finance industry, there are certain regulatory requirements like the PCI DSS. If you are a healthcare industry, you have the HIPAA, or the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. In Europe, there is the GDPR. So you also have to check what are you implementing internally. ISO 27001, for example, it's the Information Security Management System. So the ethical hackers would need to understand or at least be aware of this and have a better alignment on the level of security required for the information assets. As they also mature, I mean the ethical hackers, as they mature in understanding this relationship, they will be able to provide an input on which systems, applications, or hardware devices would need a more periodic VAPT. So as the corporate strategy is cascaded from top to bottom of the different departments, their operational performance actually feed up to the corporate level. There are the operational plans, you have the services, you have the projects, and there's also, of course, performance management or KPI associated with it. Strategic planning is always has a periodic performance management. So in summary on this slide, in terms of the ERM, what I would like to illustrate in this diagram is that the ER division understands the organization's goals, objectives, and from there, they determine the risk level to which is acceptable to the organization. They could develop their own risk in terms of the other department, and they can develop their own risk methodology because, again, for example, the environmental health and safety department risk management process is different from how we do it in the IT department. IT department, on the other hand, also understand the organization's strategic goal and therefore align and support the ERM. Now, performing a cyber risk assessment. In performing a cyber risk assessment, at least you would have to answer the what, the how, and the who, or answer what, how, and who. What do you hold for your stakeholders and customers? What, as an individual, for me, I wouldn't want any of my personal information or records to be compromised, even it is as small as a parking ticket, record of my parking ticket, or up to my banking or financial information, my health records, my driver's license, or my records of purchases online or on-site. Remember the C in the CIA, right? You can also ask what infrastructure do you have? Do you have it on-prem or on cloud? What is the value of the information that you keep? Perhaps it is difficult to quantify the value. Maybe the better question would be, what is the equivalent value of the information to you as an organization when the data are compromised and exposed? Sometimes it is the regulations that would dictate the fines, like in the EU. The GDPR sets a maximum fine of 20 million euro or 4% of the annual global turnover, or whichever is greater. However, not all GDPR infringements lead to data protection fines. Another example is the Uber company, which was later ordered to pay 148 million in its breach settlement. So the question of what is the value of information that you keep, it may be difficult to value or quantify, but you can convert that to the loss that your company would have if you are breached, if you suffer a breach. Next question is the how. How do you protect your data assets? Do you do data classification, like you label the data as confidential, restricted, or public? Do you apply encryption? How do you store your data? Is it on the prem or on the cloud? How long do you keep your data? You have an archiving policy, right? Even your archives, where do you intend to keep them? Next is the who. Who is about asking who has access to your data. Definitely the owners of the data will have their access to their own data. But other than them, Who else can manage the access? This is the internal now, your resources, and this is where the access management come in. There is also a question of when. On this third part, I also want, as a risk manager, I also want to ask the when question. When the administrators are on leave, do they still, those who are responsible for access management, do they still have access? And with regards to the where, another question that I'd like to put here is the where. I know one organization that their security in their staff device, laptop, I'd say is so strict that once they go outside the country, the location being set on, it will disable their access to the servers. Their VPNs won't work, and therefore, from here I can also answer, I also want to answer the why. Why would you need to disable or revoke the access? Is it, revoke the access when the employee leaves the country? Is it because of the risk appetite? Is it that the company is not willing to lose or pay a double-digit or triple-digit $1 million in fine? So this is how you do a risk assessment. There's always a question, a spiraling question. Every time you look at a certain control which is in place, you also verify the consequences, if it is in place or if it is not working. Now, let's talk about the VAPT and ethical hackers. So VAPT, or vulnerability assessment and pen testing, is about defending your network before the bad guys explore your vulnerabilities. Hacking is not a matter of if, but when. The sole purpose is finding the vulnerabilities in your network. You defend your network by doing the same thing as the bad guys do, but of course, without the fear of getting into jail, you know? It means you act to defeat the hackers. You think and you act like a hacker. It is also to evaluate the security posture, how the system or infrastructure are hardened, what are their vulnerabilities. During the VAPT, the ethical hackers find and attempt to exploit any vulnerabilities to determine whether unauthorized access or other malicious activities are possible. Some organizations, it is possible that they will only request for a VA, a vulnerability assessment, without the pen testing. If the VA report shows critical or high vulnerabilities, then they may opt, or they may decide to proceed with the pen testing, but only pen testing on the vulnerabilities that are critical and high. VAPT is increasingly important to organizations wanting to achieve compliance with standards, including the GDPR, the ISO 27001, which is an example, PCI DSS, or HIPAA. To some entities, it is not optional, but rather mandatory. So for them to comply with this regulatory requirement, they also do the VAPT. This is also mostly the function of the GRC. They incorporate the VAPT as one of the annual initiatives or projects that feed into either as a certification agenda or to support their annual surveillance ISO audit. You know, the ISO are valid for 3 years. So once you get the certification, the following year, you'll have a surveillance audit. So those who have the ISO 27001, sometimes they incorporate the VAPT as part of that certification. So ethical hackers' scope of work is defined or governed by the rules of engagement. This is a document issued to authorized ethical hackers or the parties involved that the management is aware of their activities. Again, as I have mentioned earlier, once an ethical hacker has a better understanding of the organization's strategy, and they know the risk appetite of their company, the information assets that are of most value to organization are and the clients, the ethical hackers, they may be able to contribute or suggest which systems, applications, or devices will need to be included in the scope of work. So we see here the ethical hackers, not just simply pen testers or doing the hacking. We treat them, we have to escalate their level of participation and role in the organization such that we see them as strategic partners, not only technical or ethical hackers. I'd like to here map the risk assessment with the VAPT. On the what are your crown jewels? This is the first step that the ethical hackers will do. Since the ROE, or the rules of engagement, defines the systems, database, application, hardware, devices that they will do a VAPT on, this is already like a targeted attack. It is the first step of hacking. So it is also called footprinting and information gathering phase. It is the preparatory phase where we collect as much information as possible about the target. Here is where you usually collect information about the network or the host. So you do port scanning, vulnerability scanning, network mapping. There are different tools. And footprinting, there are also two types of footprinting. It could be active, where the ethical hackers would directly interact with the target to gather information about it using different tools and map, for example. And there's also the passive footprinting, which is social engineering. You're trying to collect information about the target without directly accessing the target. This involves collecting information from social media or public websites. The next is the how. When I, as a risk manager, I'm doing risk assessment, in my how phase, the ethical hackers are actually in the stage of gaining access, or on the phase of gaining access. This is where the attacker breaks into the system or the network. They use various tools or methods, and after entering into a system, they can increase their privilege to administrator level, and they can install application or modify data or hide data. They will do their everything to test to what extent they can do with the level of access that they have. And once they have escalated their privilege, let's say to administrator, they can already do a lateral transfer. The who. Now, once they have accessed the system, they have penetrated the organization, the pen testers, or the ethical hackers, they will try to maintain their access as much as they can. The hacker may just hack the system to show it was vulnerable, or he can be so playful to cause more trouble, but still within the scope of the ROE, or the rules of engagement. He may want to maintain his presence as much as he can. He can do persistent attack in the background without the knowledge of the user or the organization itself. This can be done by using Trojans or rootkits or other malicious files. The aim is to maintain access until you finish the task that you plan to accomplish in the target. So as the VAPT is happening, part of my risk assessment is also to determine the effectiveness of the security controls that are in place. For example, do I have a SIEM, SIEM, security incident and event management? Did the SIEM detect the scanning? Am I notified when the ethical hackers are doing the scanning? If they planted malicious files, did I get a trigger on my anti-malware software? If not, maybe it is not because my anti-malware software is not working, but it could be that there is a missing parameter or setting, and therefore the malware was not detected. If it is a wrong configuration or misconfiguration, then I will have to drill down to the next possible vulnerability, which is the administrator. Is the administrator properly trained? And I will not stop to determine as much vulnerabilities as I can as a result of the ethical hackers VAPT activity.